The waitress fed a hungry boy behind the restaurant, unaware he was the Mafia boss's only son. The yelling hit the alley before the sound even reached her ears. She froze, tray still in hand, the faint light from the restaurant door spilling across her face. A man's furious voice echoed through the narrow space, filled with disbelief and humiliation. The manager's words cut like knives as he screamed at her for feeding a stray, for sneaking food out the back door, for giving a plate of warm pasta to a dirty, hungry boy sitting by the dumpsters. He shouted that this was a high-end restaurant, not a charity house, that her act of kindness embarrassed the establishment. She tried to explain that the boy was starving, trembling, that she couldn't just look away, but he didn't care. The crowd of kitchen staff stared, some whispering, some smirking, some too afraid to intervene. Her apron was soaked, her eyes glistened, but her voice didn't crack. She stood there in front of everyone, humiliated but unbroken, her heart still pounding from the look in that boy's eyes when he whispered thank you before disappearing into the dark. She didn't know she had just touched the heart of someone the whole city feared. Before we go deeper, tell us where you're watching from and the time in your city. Hit that subscribe button now, because what's coming next will leave your heart racing and your screen shaking. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. The manager's rage didn't stop there. He snatched the tray from her hand and flung it across the kitchen. The crash echoed like thunder. The smell of wine, sauce, and shattered glass filled the air. Everyone froze as he pointed at her and declared her done. Fired. Thrown out. She felt heat rise in her chest, but refused to beg. She pulled off her apron, laid it on the counter, and turned for the back door. Every step felt heavier, like the floor itself was rejecting her. But her mind wasn't on the humiliation. It was on that boy. The way his ribs showed through his shirt, the bruises on his arms, the quiet gratitude in his trembling voice. Something about him didn't feel like a regular street kid. There was something in his eyes, sharp, intelligent, like he'd seen too much too soon. She couldn't explain it. She just knew she had done the right thing. Outside, the air bit against her skin. The alley was quiet now, just the faint hum of the city bleeding through. She leaned against the wall, catching her breath. A deep voice behind her startled her. It wasn't the boy. It was older, smoother, dangerously calm. She turned, and her heart stopped. A man in a black suit stepped out from the shadows, tall, commanding, his eyes cold as steel. He looked like someone used to power, used to being obeyed. His gaze swept over her like a blade. He asked if she was the one who fed the boy. Her lips parted, words fumbling, but she nodded. He didn't move closer, but the air between them tightened. His voice dropped, saying that the boy she helped was not who she thought he was, that she had just stepped into something she couldn't walk away from. She frowned, confusion and fear twisting in her stomach. Before she could respond, a sleek black car rolled into the alley, headlights blinding her for a second. The man signaled, and two bodyguards stepped out, one opening the door, the other scanning the area. She could feel her pulse pounding against her ribs. The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, then said one sentence that made her blood run cold. "The boy you helped belongs to me." She blinked, not understanding at first, then realized belonged to him. The Mafia boss. Her breath hitched. She took a step back, instinct screaming to run. But he moved faster, not threateningly, just enough to remind her that escape was an option. His eyes were dark with calculation, but there was something else buried deep in them. Curiosity. He told her the boy had been missing since last night, that no one had been able to find him. And then, out of nowhere, she appeared and fed him. He wanted to know how she found him. Her voice shook as she said she didn't. He was just there, hungry. She just helped. The man's jaw tightened. He studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then he stepped closer, close enough for her to smell the faint scent of tobacco and danger clinging to his coat. He said quietly that kindness was expensive in his world, that helping the wrong person could cost her everything. She whispered that she didn't care, that if it were to happen again, she'd feed the boy anyway. Something shifted in his expression then. For a brief moment, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile but not quite. He told her to stay out of sight, that his men would take it from here. She refused. She wanted to know if the boy was safe. His eyes flicked toward her with an intensity that silenced every thought in her head. He said the boy was his son. Her knees almost buckled. His son. The realization crashed into her like a wave. The Mafia boss's only son, the heir to one of the most feared names in the city, was the boy she had fed behind the restaurant. She couldn't process it. The pieces didn't fit, but the look on his face told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't lying. His voice was low, steady, but laced with something raw when he said the boy hadn't eaten in 2 days because someone had betrayed them. Someone inside his circle had tried to use the child as leverage, and the boy escaped. Her heart twisted. She couldn't imagine what kind of world would starve a child like that. What kind of enemies would hunt a boy just to hurt his father? But before she could speak, another car screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Doors flew open. Men in dark coats jumped out, guns drawn. The boss's bodyguards reacted instantly, pushing her behind them as chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the air. Sparks flew from the walls. The Mafia boss didn't flinch. He drew his own weapon with calm precision and fired, every shot clean and deliberate. His men closed ranks around him. She crouched, trembling, watching the world explode into violence. One of the attackers fell beside her, groaning, mask half torn, revealing a familiar scar she'd seen before. One of the waiters from the restaurant. Her mind spun. Betrayal. It was all connected. She tried to shout a warning, but a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her up roughly. It wasn't a stranger. It was the boy, alive, scared, standing right there, calling her name. Her chest tightened. The boss turned, saw his son, and everything in his face changed. For the first time, the ruthless composure cracked. He barked orders, moving to shield the child. She didn't think. She moved with them, helping pull the boy toward the car. Bullets ricocheted around them. The sound was deafening. She could feel the heat, the fear, the adrenaline burning through her veins. The boy clung to her as if she was the only safe thing left in his world. The boss fired again, covering them. His men countered the ambush with brutal precision. And then, just as suddenly as it began, silence fell. The gunfire stopped. The smoke cleared. The attackers were down. The boss stood tall, his coat torn, his eyes blazing with fury. He turned to her, breathing hard, and for a moment, neither spoke. His son hid behind her leg, small hand clutching her apron. The boss's voice was rough when he said she had no idea what she'd just done. She had saved the one thing in his life that mattered. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said she just did what anyone would do. But they both knew that wasn't true. No one else had. And that's why everything was about to change. He stared at her like he was trying to memorize the moment, like he couldn't believe someone so ordinary had done something extraordinary. His men were dragging the bodies away, checking pulses, securing the area, but he didn't move. His son was still holding onto her apron, refusing to let go, trembling like the world might collapse if she disappeared. The boss's jaw clenched, muscles twitching as he tried to process the chaos. Then he walked forward slowly, every step heavy, deliberate, commanding silence from everyone around him. He stopped right in front of her, voice low and sharp, asking if she had any idea who those men were. She shook her head, still breathing hard, still feeling the adrenaline buzzing under her skin. He said they were his men once. They were supposed to protect his family, not turn their guns on his child. He turned away for a second, eyes dark with fury, veins tightening in his temple. She could sense it, the kind of rage that didn't explode, it burned. Controlled, cold, deadly. When he faced her again, his expression had changed. He said the boy needed to be taken somewhere safe, that she was coming too. She blinked, confused, saying she wasn't part of this. He didn't ask again. He simply nodded to his guards, and before she could protest, one opened the car door, ushering her and the boy inside. The boss followed, closing the door with a force that made the car shudder. The ride was silent, tense, suffocating. The boy clung to her side, his small hand gripping hers like it was the only solid thing in his world. The boss sat opposite them, eyes unreadable in the dark interior. Occasionally, the lights from passing cars flickered across his face, highlighting the faint scar near his jaw. the kind that told stories of too many battles fought and survived. She wanted to ask where they were going, but every time her mouth opened, his cold gaze met hers, and the words died in her throat. When the car finally stopped, the boy stirred. They weren't at a mansion or some grand hideout like she expected. It was a discreet estate hidden behind iron gates, guarded but quiet, the kind of place you'd never find unless you knew it existed. The guards escorted them inside. The boy ran straight to one of the servants, calling for food, warmth, safety. She stood frozen in the hallway, trying to understand what kind of world she had stumbled into. The boss gave quick orders, voice calm but clipped. One of the men brought a glass of whiskey, which he ignored, eyes locked on her. He asked her name. She told him. He repeated it slowly, tasting it, then said it was a name he wouldn't forget. Her pulse quickened when he said she wasn't leaving, that someone had to have tipped the traders off about where the boy would be. He needed to know how they found her, how they knew she would feed him. Her stomach dropped. She swore she didn't know anything. She had only seen a starving child. He studied her reaction closely, too closely, then called one of his men to check the restaurant. The way he said it made it sound less like a request and more like a death sentence for whoever was guilty. Hours blurred into each other. She was given a change of clothes, something simple but elegant. The boy had fallen asleep in the next room, his breathing soft, peaceful. She found herself standing near the window, staring at the city lights through bulletproof glass. The door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. His presence filled the air before his footsteps even reached her. He said quietly that his son hadn't spoken to anyone in months, that the boy hadn't trusted anyone, not even him. Until tonight. Until her. Her throat tightened. She said it wasn't a big deal. He stepped closer, saying it was. His tone was no longer the sharp command of a boss. It was quieter, heavier, more human. He told her that years ago, his wife had been killed in a hit meant for him. Since then, his son had withdrawn, broken by fear. Feeding him, protecting him, even smiling at him. It was more than anyone had managed in years. She didn't know what to say. His eyes softened, but only slightly, like he was letting a part of his armor drop for the first time. The next moment shattered the calm. A knock on the door. Urgent. One of his men stepped in, voice trembling slightly as he said the restaurant had been burned down. The manager who humiliated her earlier was found tied to a chair, eyes open, but gone. The boss's face hardened instantly. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. This was no random attack. This was a message. He turned to her and said the boy was the target, but now, so was she. They had seen her. They knew she helped him. And that meant she was in the middle of this war whether she wanted it or not. He ordered his men to lock down the estate, double the guards, and sweep the perimeter. She protested, saying she could just disappear, but his glare silenced her. He told her that no one who touched his son would live to try again, and that now, protecting her was part of that vow. She asked why he cared so much. He didn't answer, not with words. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out the boy's small bracelet, the one he had since birth, and placed it in her hand. It was a silent way of saying that what she did connected her to them now. Night deepened. She sat by the boy's bedside, watching him sleep. The boss stood by the door, arms crossed, eyes distant. For a man who terrified the city, he looked strangely vulnerable in that moment. He whispered that she reminded him of someone, his late wife. The way she defied him, the way she protected the boy without hesitation. The comparison hit her like lightning, filling the air with something neither of them could name. But the peace didn't last. The security alarm blared. The boss's eyes snapped to hers, sharp alert. He told her to stay put, then stormed out, barking orders. She ran to the window and saw headlights cutting through the darkness, multiple cars speeding toward the gates. The guards were already firing, chaos erupting outside. She grabbed the boy, shaking him awake, whispering for him not to be afraid. He clung to her, tears streaking his face. The door burst open again, one of the guards shouting for her to move. The boss was outside, fighting back, firing, commanding his men with terrifying precision. She could hear the sound of bullets, glass shattering, engines roaring. A flash of movement caught her eye. Someone was on the roof, a sniper, aiming directly for the window. She didn't think. She dropped to the floor, dragging the boy with her as the shot tore through the glass, hitting the wall behind them. She screamed for help. The boss appeared seconds later, diving inside, grabbing the boy and shielding him with his body. His arm bled from the glass, but his eyes burned with fury. He ordered his men to find the shooter. She saw his hand tremble slightly, not from fear, but from rage. He turned to her, saying this was no longer about betrayal. This was personal. Someone wanted his family destroyed. Someone wanted his bloodline erased. She felt the weight of those words in her bones. She realized this wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a war, and she was standing right at the heart of it. He looked at her, face inches from hers, voice low but burning with conviction. He told her that no one would touch his son again. Not while he still breathed. Not while she was under his protection. The boy clung to both of them, crying softly, and for a fleeting moment, in the middle of chaos and violence, they weren't a waitress, a mafia boss, and a scared child. They were something else. A broken version of a family, bound by danger, held together by instinct. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't stay like this for long. Because in his world, peace never lasted. And in hers, survival had just begun. She could still taste the smoke in the air, the echo of gunfire ringing in her ears long after the last shot had been fired. The boy had finally stopped crying, clinging tightly to her arm as though letting go would mean losing everything all over again. The boss stood in the doorway, shirt torn, blood on his sleeve, fury carved into every line of his face. He told her to pack a bag. They were leaving. She asked where, but he didn't answer, just turned his back and shouted orders at his men, demanding new cars, new routes, and total silence on their movements. The mansion was compromised. Someone inside had sold them out again. Her heart hammered as she stuffed clothes into a small duffel, still trembling. Every sound made her flinch, the slamming of a car door, the creak of footsteps in the hall. The boy clutched a small stuffed animal in one hand and refused to let it go. When she turned, the boss was standing in the doorway again, his voice lower now, controlled, but filled with tension that could break steel. He said she was coming with them, because wherever his son went, she went. That wasn't a request. Minutes later, they were on the road, engines roaring through the night. 3 cars in convoy formation, windows tinted, headlights off. She sat in the back with the boy, who had fallen asleep again, head on her lap. The boss sat in front, phone pressed to his ear, giving commands that could decide who lived and who died. His tone was cold, methodical, deadly calm, a voice used to being obeyed. But when the call ended, he leaned back in his seat, looked at her reflection in the window, and said softly that he didn't trust anyone anymore. Only her. The words hit her harder than they should have. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to ask why, but something in his eyes told her the truth. She had done what no one else in his empire had managed. She had acted without fear. No hesitation, no calculation, just instinct. And in his world, that kind of loyalty couldn't be bought. It was priceless. Suddenly the car jerked, tires screeching as the driver swerved hard. A van had appeared out of nowhere, cutting them off. Gunfire erupted again, bullets smashing into the windshield. The boss cursed, pulled his gun, kicked open the door, and started firing back without hesitation. The convoy split instantly, one car turning left, another right. She ducked low, covering the boy as the driver yelled for her to stay down. The car sped backward, spinning around, tires burning against the asphalt. The boy was shaking, whispering that he wanted his dad. She could see the boss outside, still shooting, shouting at his men to get her out safely. Then she saw it, one of the attackers moving behind him, gun raised, taking aim. Without thinking, she opened the car door, grabbed a metal rod from the floor, and ran toward him. He turned just in time to see her swing, slamming the rod into the man's arm, sending the gun flying. The boss spun around, fired once, and the attacker dropped. He grabbed her wrist, furious, shouting that she was supposed to stay in the car. She yelled back that she wasn't going to let him die, saving her. For a second, neither moved. The chaos around them blurred. Then he pulled her close, eyes locked on hers, voice raw as he said she was insane. She laughed breathlessly, saying he already knew that. The sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. The boss ordered his men to fall back. They jumped into another car, engines roaring as they disappeared into the night. Hours later, they stopped at an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The boy was asleep again, exhausted. The boss sat on a crate, head bowed, hands bloody. She crouched beside him, cleaned the wound on his arm with shaking hands, and asked him how long he'd been living like this. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice that sounded almost tired, he said too long. He told her that every enemy he'd ever made had one weakness: to exploit family. That's why he had hidden his son, erased his existence from the world. Only a few men knew where the boy went, and now even they were dead, which meant the leak came from someone close. She asked who could do that. He looked up slowly, eyes burning like fire. His own brother. She froze. He said his brother had always wanted power, had always hated playing second. The boy was supposed to inherit everything one day, and that made him a threat. He believed his brother had orchestrated the betrayal, even arranged the fake ambush that killed his wife years ago. Every word made her blood run colder. She asked what he planned to do. He said he was going to end it. Tonight. She told him he couldn't just walk in and start another war. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said the war had already started the moment they came for his son. Then he stood, loaded his gun, and called his men. She tried to stop him, grabbing his arm, begging him not to leave the boy alone. He looked down at her hand, gripping him so tightly, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression. He told her to stay with the boy, no matter what happened. He promised he would come back. The moment he left, silence filled the warehouse. She sat by the boy, holding him as he slept, every second stretching into an eternity. Then the sound came, engines again, but not his. She ran to the window and saw 3 black SUVs pulling in fast. Her heart dropped. She whispered for the boy to wake up. He blinked, confused, still half asleep. She grabbed his hand and led him to the back exit, but armed men were already surrounding the building. She hid behind a stack of crates, pulling the boy close. Voices echoed outside. They were calling her name. They said the boss was dead, that his brother was taking over, that she and the boy belonged to him now. She bit her lip so hard it bled. She didn't believe them. She couldn't. But fear crept into her anyway, cold and merciless. The boy started crying again. She covered his mouth gently, whispering for him to be brave. Footsteps drew closer. She looked around desperately. There was no weapon, no escape, just shadows and silence. Then she saw it, an old maintenance hatch leading to the drainage tunnel below. She pried it open, shoved the boy inside first, then crawled in after him, closing it just as the door burst open behind them. The tunnel was narrow, dark, filled with the sound of dripping water and their heavy breaths. She told him to keep moving no matter what. When they finally emerged into the open, dawn was breaking. They were somewhere near the docks, the city skyline distant and hazy. She looked around, trying to decide where to go, when headlights flared behind them again. Another car. Her heart jumped. She grabbed the boy and turned to run, but then she heard the voice. His voice. The boss stepped out of the car alive, furious, bruised, but breathing. He had blood on his hands and exhaustion in his eyes, but when he saw them, the fire returned. He ran to them, pulled the boy into his arms, holding him like he would never let go again. She stood there shaking, half in disbelief, half in relief. He looked at her like she was the only reason he was still standing. Then he said he had unfinished business. His brother had escaped, but not for long. He promised that once this was over, everything would change. But as he spoke, another explosion rocked the distance, his estate. The last safe house he owned. Gone. He looked at the smoke rising over the horizon and clenched his fists. His enemies weren't retreating. They were closing in. And now, the fight wasn't just about blood or revenge. It was about survival. She felt the boy's small hand slip into hers again. And in that moment, she realized there was no going back. She wasn't just the waitress who fed a hungry child anymore. She was standing beside the most dangerous man in the city, and his war had become hers. The ground still trembled from the blast. the sky smeared with smoke that glowed orange against the rising sun. The boy buried his face into his father's chest, trembling as the boss stood frozen, eyes locked on the black cloud curling over what used to be his home. He didn't speak for a long time. His jaw was tight, his shoulders trembling, not from fear, but from fury held too long. The waitress stood beside him, wind whipping her hair across her face, heart pounding as she watched him transform right before her eyes. The man who had been just a father a moment ago was gone. What stood there now was the Mafia boss, cold, unbreakable, and ready for war. He finally turned to her, voice low but shaking with restrained rage, saying they took everything. His men, his money, his home. They wanted to bury his bloodline, erase his legacy, and now they had come for his son. He said there would be no more running. The fight was coming to them, and this time he would end it his way. She tried to reason with him, telling him they needed to get the boy to safety first, but he cut her off, eyes burning through her. Safety didn't exist anymore. The only way to protect his son was to destroy every threat left standing. He ordered one of his surviving men to take the boy somewhere hidden, somewhere even he didn't know. The man hesitated, but the boss's glare left no room for argument. The boy clung to his father's coat, begging not to be left again. The boss knelt, cupped his son's face in his blood-stained hands, whispering that he would come back for him, that no one would ever hurt him again, that he swore it on his mother's grave. The boy nodded weakly, tears streaking his cheeks, and let himself be carried away into the car that sped off down the empty road. The silence that followed was deafening. The boss didn't look back once. He turned to the waitress, eyes cold and unreadable, asking if she was afraid. She said she was terrified. He gave a grim smile and said good. Fear kept people alive. Then he told her to get in the car. They were going hunting. The drive back into the city was pure tension. Every street corner felt like an ambush waiting to happen. Every passing car felt like a target. He had only a handful of men left now, those who had stayed loyal despite knowing they might not survive the night. The waitress sat silently in the back seat, trying to make sense of how her life had become a battlefield. She had been feeding tables, cleaning glasses, and smiling through long shifts just days ago. Now she was holding a pistol, given to her by the most dangerous man she'd ever met, with her fingerprints already burned into its handle. They reached an abandoned club downtown, a place once owned by his brother before the betrayal. The boss kicked open the door, gun raised, moving like a storm through the shadows. Two guards jumped out, but they barely had time to aim before he put them down. The waitress flinched at the sound, but he didn't even blink. He told her to stay close, keep low, and shoot if anyone touched her. She tried to tell him she wasn't a killer, but he didn't answer, just kept moving deeper inside. They found what they were looking for, a group of his brother's men sitting around a table, laughing over the chaos they had caused. When they saw him, the laughter died instantly. One of them tried to grab his weapon, but the boss fired first. The room exploded into gunfire, bottles shattering, wood splintering, smoke filling the air. She ducked behind the bar, covering her ears as bullets flew past. When the shots finally stopped, the only sound left was the ringing in her ears and the echo of his footsteps as he walked across the room. He grabbed one of the wounded men by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and demanded to know where his brother was. The man spat blood, muttering that his brother had already left the country with half his crew. The boss pressed the barrel of his gun to the man's forehead, voice deadly calm as he said, "Liars die fast." The man stammered, trembling, finally confessing that his brother was still in the city, hiding in one of the family's safe houses near the docks, the same docks they had escaped through earlier. The boss dropped him, fired once, and started walking. The waitress followed, still shaking, her hands sticky with fear. She asked what he would do once he found him. He said there would be no mercy. Not anymore. By the time they reached the docks again, the sun was high, painting the waves in red and gold. The safe house stood like a fortress surrounded by armed guards. The boss surveyed it from the shadows, eyes calculating, mind already working out every angle. He ordered his men to split into two groups, one to draw attention, the other to follow him through the side entrance. The waitress wanted to tell him to wait, to think, but she could see in his eyes there was no waiting. His fury had already crossed the point of return. The first explosion hit moments later. Smoke and chaos erupted as his men stormed the front. He grabbed her hand, pulling her through the side door as alarms blared. Inside was a maze of corridors and shouts, gunfire echoing like thunder. They moved fast, silent, and deadly, until they reached the main hall, and there he was, the brother, standing by the window, gun in hand, smirking as if he had been waiting for this all along. The brothers faced each other, the air between them heavy with everything unsaid. The boss told him he destroyed their family, betrayed blood for greed, murdered the woman who had loved them both, and now he wanted his son too. The brother just laughed, saying family was nothing but weakness, that the empire should have been his from start. The boss raised his gun. The brother mirrored him. The waitress stood frozen, watching the standoff. Two men who shared the same blood, the same eyes, the same pain, but only one of them still had a heart. The brother fired first. The bullet grazed the boss's shoulder, spinning him slightly. He fired back, hitting the brother in the leg. The fight turned brutal and personal. Two predators locked in a final war. They crashed through furniture, fists flying, blood splattering the walls. She screamed for them to stop, but neither heard her. The brother grabbed a knife from the table, lunging forward. The boss caught his wrist, twisted, forcing the blade against his own brother's chest. There was a sharp gasp, then silence. The brother's body went limp, falling to the floor as the knife clattered away. The boss stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from his hand. For a long moment, he just stared down, breathing hard. He looked at her, voice softer than she'd ever heard, and said she didn't just save his son, she saved him. She turned away, hiding the tears that burned her eyes. The city skyline appeared ahead, golden in the morning light, and for once, it didn't look like a battlefield. It looked like hope. He reached over, placing his hand over hers, whispering that maybe they both deserved a new beginning. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The silence between them said enough. As the sun climbed higher, the smoke faded behind them, swallowed by the wind. The boy stirred in the back seat, murmuring for his father. The boss smiled for the first time in years, promising quietly that he wasn't going anywhere anymore. The waitress turned to look at him. This man who had been both monster and savior, who had fought the world and still chosen love, and she realized fate had never been cruel. It had just been waiting for the right moment to heal. They disappeared into the city that once feared him, leaving behind fire, vengeance, and the ghosts of their pasts. What lay ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like freedom. The Mafia boss lost his empire, but found redemption through the woman who showed him compassion and the son who gave him purpose. In the ashes of his old life, he discovered something stronger than power: peace, love, and the courage to start again. Some debts are paid not in blood, but forgiveness. No empire stands forever, but love, when born in the darkest places, can outlive every enemy, every sin, and every fall. Hit subscribe if your heart raced. Comment your city and time. Share this story if it moved you. And stay tuned. The next tale is wilder,